Well, as landscape photographers, obviously one of the premier times to take photos is sunset or sunrise, and we all love capturing that great wide angle, beautiful clouds in the sky in the early morning or late at night. So in this video, I wanted to show you guys a few of my favorite tips and tricks and little techniques that I like to use on my sunset or sunrise photos. I think this one's gonna help you to take your sunset and sunrise images to the next level. Now, if you're new here, I'm Austin James Jackson, landscape photographer based here in Southern Utah. I wanna thank you guys so much for being here. I was fortunate enough to capture a beautiful sunset a couple weeks ago out in the Nevada desert. This made for the perfect opportunity for me to show you a few of my favorite tips and tricks that I like to do on those sunset or sunrise images. This one in particular is a sunrise. Now, while there is certainly some cool stuff you can do in Photoshop, this tutorial video is going to cover Lightroom. I know most of you guys are Lightroom users, so we're going to be covering some Lightroom tips and tricks so you can do a lot of stuff with masking. I don't want to waste any more time talking to you. Let's jump in there. This is the image that we're working on. And you can see this is how I shot it in the field, exposed to the right. So I'm not overexposing the highlights here. You can see we've got a lot of darkness in the frame. Now, first thing that I want to address is the elephant in the room, which is kind of funny because this is actually a photo of something that looks like an elephant. But one thing I see a lot of people mistakenly do is they'll go in here, photo like this, they shoot it like this, they know, you want to maintain those highlights. And so what they'll do is they will drop the highlights as much as possible because now you get a little bit more detail in the highlights. They'll raise the shadows and they'll raise the blacks. Now, if you are someone who looks at your histogram, you would say like, oh, well, my histogram looks pretty good now. Everything is more central. But your foreground is brighter than the sky, so it just doesn't look realistic. And you've also introduced a little bit of ghosting here, which is not good. So I want to show you my way of kind of editing, how I kind of keep things a little bit more realistic, I think. And obviously realistic is totally up to what your own brain thinks about it. But in my mind, I'm going to show you how I like to create this a little bit more realistic looking. So if you shot it like this, first thing you want to do, yes, you will drop the highlights just a little bit, but not a lot. Then I like to bump up the shadows. Don't feel like you need to overdo it here. And then I'll bring up the blacks and I'll bring up the whites. You bring up the whites, you kind of punch those highlights a little bit. A lot of people will subtract the white slider because they think that it does something kind of similar to highlights, but I actually like to increase the white slider and decrease the highlights. That helps to kind of darken the highlights, but still punch the brightest spots on in the bright parts of your image. So you can see just like that. So pretty quick and easy. Now my foreground is still pretty dark. I am going to use the tone curve to add contrast, not the contrast slider. I've talked about this in other videos. I don't want to darken the darks too much, but I am just going to drag that down just slightly. Drag this up. And then the biggest thing here, I want to grab the blacks point and just bring it up a little bit. You go too far and you really flatten your image out here. So I don't want to go, probably between 5 and 10 points is good. Somewhere in there. Now we can increase the exposure a little bit. We can bring the highlights up just a little bit more. We don't want to go too far with it though. Somewhere about in there looks good. Now I'm also keeping in mind at the end of this video, I'm going to throw a little vignette on. So I'm going to darken this foreground a little bit. So that will afford me a little bit in terms of I can brighten the rock while still darkening the foreground here. And that'll make more sense shortly. Now you can do some clarity and texture sliders here just a little bit. You don't want to overdo it. A lot of times on clarity, I'll actually subtract. I'm actually just going to leave it at 0 here. And then dehaze if you want. Not a lot on that one either. Now I'm not feeling like vibrance or saturation needs to be adjusted, but I am going to go up and touch up the white balance here. This is usually the point in which I adjust the white balance. Problem I have is I think the photo is too warm. Everything is too warm. The sky should be a little bit more blue. So let's just drag this towards blue a little bit. And you want to see the hills in the background be blue. And I might drag this towards green just a hair. Just like that. Now, what that's done is just giving me a little bit more honest feel, I think, in the white balance. White balance is so important when it comes to making it honest. The colors are not quite as good in the sky now, but that's okay. I want to get that temperature and that tint dialed in so everything in my image is neutral. We can creatively add that color back later. Now you can go down if you want to do the profile corrections, you can. Usually that's something that you want to select at the start. I forgot to do it, but we'll just select it now. I forget all the time, to be honest. And that's pretty much it here in your basic sliders. You know, if you want to do a little bit of sharpening here, you could. Why not? I'll show you how to do the sharpening. I'm going to hold the Alt-Option button, click and slide this masking slider. Anything that's white is going to get sharpened. Anything that's black will not get sharpened, which is good because I want a nice selection of the edges. Detail all the way up, radius all the way down, and you can increase the sharpening. You want to be careful not to add this little edge here, that little halo. So we'll go back down. You can see we're not really doing a lot of sharpening, just a little bit. That looks fine. So now we're going to get kind of into the meat of this tutorial where we're really going to dial in our creativity on this image, and that is going to be in our masking tools. So important to use these masking tools. If you don't understand how to use them, I'll link another video where you can learn how to use those. Now, the first thing that I want to do is make a few adjustments to the sky. So I want to add a little bit of glow kind of on the horizon here. And that should be pretty easy to do. So we can use the Select Sky mask. You can see that does a great job just selecting the sky for us. We'll expand that out so we can see it a little bit more. And then I want to use a linear gradient to select up through this image. Now there's many different ways that you can do this, but I'm actually just going to subtract linear gradient and then subtract from the top. And you'll see why in just a second. So we'll subtract linear gradient. We'll click and drag. Now, if you're not aware, anything that's white will show through in our mask. Anything that's black will not. So you can see we're just making a mask kind of this lower horizon level here. Let's go just like that. Now we can come back in. I like to add just a touch of glow here, so I'll increase the exposure. You can increase the saturation if you want, and you can even add color here if you wanted to. You know, you can see what this color is doing here. We could add a little bit of glow in there. You'd want it to be probably yellow. Toggle that before and after. Really subtle change there. Don't worry, I've got some other tricks up my sleeve that are going to be a little bit more intense, or I don't know if that's the word for it, but we'll just go with it. So I'm going to show you how to accentuate the light. You can see in the image here, let's close this down. The sunlight is like somewhere right back in here. So I want to brighten that just to kind of add some depth and dimension to my scene. So what we're going to do is create a new mask here. And this is going to have to be a multi-step mask because we want it to apply to just the sky, but we want to do a radial gradient. So I think the best way to do that would be select sky, and then we are going to, actually, no, I'm sorry. We're going to undo that. We are going to select radial gradient. We're going to draw the radial gradient just like that, about where it appears in the image, that's in the right spot. Then we're going to subtract sky. Now, we subtracted the sky, but what we actually want to do is have it apply to only the sky. So we're going to invert this sky layer. Now you can see this radial gradient here is combined with that sky mask, so it's just applying right there. You could have done subtract subject and not have to invert the sky, but I didn't think subject would make a good selection of everything except the sky in my image. So that's why I did it that way. Hopefully that's not too confusing. Now what you want to do is adjust this just a little bit. Now you can bring the exposure up. You can bring the saturation up, or you can just add color here. Just add a little bit of yellow. Just like that. And I don't mind this being a touch blown out. I think I'm not going to use the dehaze there. I'm just going to kind of scroll around. Let's just use that. Okay, just like that. Toggle the before and after. Very subtle little change, but that kind of helps to add a little bit of a focal point almost to the image where the sun is coming up. So I think I'm pretty happy with that. Now, the other thing that I like to do is add a little vignette here, and I might do a little bit more masking, but let's throw the vignette on right now. I like to do this with a radial gradient. I've got other videos covering this, but the radial gradient is by far the best way to do it. So you'll draw your radial gradient, you will hit the invert button, and then for a vignette, you probably want about 50 on the feather. You might have to hit Command minus or Control minus to zoom out here. Let's move it just like that, and then we will start to subtract exposure. Bring this in. Now, the thing that I like about this kind of vignette is it's totally customizable. Right now, we just have a basic vignette. We could have used a slider and it would have looked the same. But the benefit of this truly is that you can shape this how you want. So I can drag the edges out. If I want to make it a little bit darker on the bottom, but not quite as dark on the top, I can do that like this. Just like that. Toggle the before and after. Okay, now that's looking pretty good. I like what it's doing on the bottom here. If you wanted to make it a little bit darker on the bottom, you could add a linear gradient. Just click and drag this up like that. I might want to drag this off. It's a little bit too strong. Just in there like that. Now you can see, just like that, we will apply the vignette. So one thing that I want to do now, I can go in there, because I've applied this vignette, everything is really dark, so I can increase the exposure just a touch, and I can bring the shadows up just a little bit more, just like that. I might drop the highlights just a tad further. Now, right in there is looking pretty good. So let's look at what we've done so far. This was the before, this is after, before, after. Now, the other thing that I'm seeing as I look at this image is I'm feeling like this blue isn't quite right in the sky. Maybe it's a white balance thing. I'm not quite sure, but what we're going to do is go into our HSL sliders here, or the color mixer tab as they call it now. And I'm actually going to use point color for this. And this is a great way to just adjust any color in your image, but this works really well on skies when you feel like they're not quite the right color. And I'm just going to sample something that's a good, I don't want to do all the way over here because it's really dark. I don't want to do here because it's really light. I want to do something maybe in the middle, right about there. Now you can adjust the hue on that. We will want to increase the range, so we're making more of a selection. And you want to be careful by sliding it too far, or you'll have some weird stuff going on there. But just a little bit here, just to make that blue. And you can increase the saturation if you're having a hard time determining the color. Increase the saturation, get it to where you feel like it should be. So I feel like the blue should be about like that. And then drop the saturation back down, just like that. I feel like that looks a little bit more realistic. You could go in here and make adjustments to some of the oranges if you want as well. Increase the saturation or the luminance. You probably wouldn't want to do the luminance anymore. But just that's another thing that you can do on your sunsets. You want to be careful not to overdo that because it can get pretty out of hand. Now I want to try one more thing. I don't know how well it's going to work, but let's try it anyways. I'll show you this cool little trick that I've been doing on a few of my images lately. And you may be able to do this better in Photoshop, but I'll show you how you would do it in Lightroom. Grab your masking, create a new mask. We're going to do a select subject. What I'm trying to do is select this rock here. We'll see if it does a good job. It actually did pretty decently. Let's hide this just so we can see. Yeah, I think it's done a decent job. Now we're going to invert this mask just like that. So now it's selecting everything except for our elephant-shaped rock. Now we're going to scroll down to the dehaze. And actually, we're not going to use dehaze. We're going to use exposure. And we're going to drop contrast, maybe just a touch. We'll keep the highlights down there, but we'll keep increasing the exposure. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm just increasing the brightness of everything except for the rock, because right now, this is the before I did this. I feel like the rock kind of blends in with everything around it. By doing this, we've increased the brightness of the things behind it so it doesn't quite blend in as much. It stands out a little bit more, and I like that just a little bit better. Now, you could touch this up with a brush, do as much or as little as you want, but this is a great way to separate kind of your background from your foreground here. Things in the background should be a little bit brighter and a little bit lower in contrast than things in the foreground. So that kind of just makes sense. Last but not least, I like to always check with my crop tool, make sure my horizon's straight. Best way to do that, I think, crop tool, grab your ruler, and then select where the horizon would be. I don't want to select these mountains up here, but I want to select like below the mountains where the, I guess, true horizon would actually be. And it should probably be just like that. So I think now we're a little bit more on center there. See before and after. Really small, subtle difference, but it does make a difference, and I like what that's doing. But otherwise, that would pretty much be how I would edit this photo. Before and after, you can see just a few minutes. We have pumped this out pretty quickly, and I think it looks great with just a few minutes worth of work. All right, so there is a few of my favorite tips and tricks when you're editing sunset images. Hopefully that helps you to create some better sunrise and sunset photos. If you have any questions or tips of your own, or any comments, anything like that, let me know down below in the comments. I'd love to hear from you guys. I respond to everybody if I can. And I'm always really, really happy to answer your questions. Otherwise, if you are serious about improving your photography, make sure you subscribe to my channel here. Every single week, I'm posting these long form videos, and every other day, right now, I'm posting short videos as well, all designed to help you improve your own photography. Otherwise, thank you guys so incredibly much for being here. My name is Austin James Jackson. We'll see you guys next time.